if we can go to the chorus of California Girls, you'll hear Bruce's voice on the second. It's the second, I Wish They All Could Be California. So.
I wish they all could be California. I wish they all could be California.
Yeah, that's right. And especially that last note, he goes up high. That's one spot where I can hear his voice really well. And then at the very end, go to the tag. Okay, now here's where, after the riff, now Brian will sing the first time, then Bruce answers it. That's Bruce.
Ah, totally can hear that. All right, welcome back to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I am Adam Schreiner, sitting here with Matthew Hartz, and we are going to get into the Summer Days and Summer Nights album today. But before we do that, as usual, we got to do some housekeeping stuff, and also want to go over a little unfortunate news that happened in the Beach Boys world. So, if you want to follow Matthew on Instagram, it's Matthew Hartz Music. And then Facebook, you can just look up Matthew Hartz. And then obviously, most of the activity we have is going to be on YouTube. That's where we post videos of the podcast, and then also, we have a few shorts in there that we want to start doing more shorts, and so that's where we're most active, is going to be on YouTube. So let's talk. I just want to do a quick reminder. I know we've got some kind of an influx in some more subscribers and listeners, so want to just talk about how this podcast is set up and what we're going through right now. So when we started the podcast, we just kind of started going through in season 1, going through the history, kind of brushing over some songs of the albums during the history and the time period that we were covering. And then in season 2, we started doing these kind of full analysis of the album, starting with Sunflower. And then we enjoyed that. We got a lot of good feedback that people liked the album analysis. So now what we're doing is we're going back, and we're doing album analysis of the albums that we covered in the first season. So for example, this episode would correspond with our season 1 episode 6, I think. And it's the Wrecking Crew episode. So
yeah, it says 1965 and the Wrecking Crew.
So the best way to listen to this, if you're new, is you would listen to that episode where we cover more of the history, what's going on with the Beach Boys. From a historical context, like I said, we brush over a couple of the songs. Yeah. But this is a full in-depth. We're going to break down each song from this album, and this also corresponds to last episode of the Today album. Mm-hmm. So 1965, the Wrecking Crew. You could listen to that and listen to the last episode, this episode, and then the Beach Boys Party album, which we'll do next.
Nah, that really wouldn't. That would not be pertinent to the party.
But don't you talk about it in that episode?
Probably do a little bit. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think you talk about like Barbara Ann was on there and stuff like that. Okay. So
there's not much Wrecking Crew on the Party album.
Yeah, not much Wrecking Crew, but it got kind of lumped into that time period of 1965.
As a matter of fact, I think only one, Hal, participated on some things. So, anyway.
So we'll get into that next episode. Is going to be the Party album. So, one thing is that the other part of this podcast is that I'm just a casual listener. Okay. I've liked the Beach Boys. I had this Greatest Summer Hits album, or Greatest Surfer Tunes album or CD that my dad used to always play when I was younger. So I'm more of a casual fan, even to the point, I think even in that episode, I say, which would have been, I don't know, it was our 6th episode ever. And I say one of my favorite songs is Do You Want to Dance? It's like my number 3 song is Do You Want to Dance, which at that time, that was the case. But now that I've been exposed to so much more Beach Boys music, I mean, although I love Do You Want to Dance, it's definitely got knocked down significantly because I just didn't know that all this other music even existed from the Beach Boys. And then you have Matthew, who we're in his, we call this the In My Beach Boys room. As you can see in the background, he has a whole space dedicated to the Beach Boys, their career, all the memorabilia that he's collected over the years of being a fan. And so essentially you could appeal to two different audiences here. You could have someone who is more on the Matthew side and really into the the real details and all the aspects of the historical context of the Beach Boys, or you could be like me, where I like them, but I really didn't know how much depth there was to their career. So, that's kind of the idea, to where, if you have somebody that's like, hey, more like Matthew, you got to check out this podcast, or more like me, hey, this guy didn't know anything, but then he got into it, and now, so that's really the basis.
You knew a lot. You knew more than just nothing.
No, yeah, but I guess more of just like, I've learned a lot, like so much to the point where like I even will forget that you've taught me things or told me things. Where I'm like, oh, that's a cover, and then you're like, yeah, we've already gone over this. It's like, oh, so much information to remember, You
kind of reminded me of something that I've wanted to say for a while too. Is about the whole fiddle thing. And obviously, if you look at my history, I have a big history in the old time fiddle world, and so I have some knowledge there. And then there's this whole nother Beach Boys side of me. And I just want to say, it was never an idea. Let's just put it this way. I wouldn't have ever, just for fun, covered a bunch of Beach Boy tunes on the fiddle.
Right.
Or the violin.
Yeah.
Is what it is. It was the uniqueness of that even kind of led us to this podcast. My accountant kind of gave me the idea of, the idea was people might land on this thing and go, what's this? The fiddle Beach Boy guy. And I want to say to so many people out there, it's probably the sort of thing, if I would have landed on it, I would have been repulsed by it initially.
If you saw
it wasn't my dream to marry the fiddle and the Beach Boy stuff.
Right,
it's just, that's what makes it so unique. And we thought we might draw some people in like that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we might not have ever even integrated the violin into it.
Yeah.
Because we certainly could have done that.
And
so I just want to, I want to address that, because I do get that every once in a while, like, what in the world is this? Well, because it was so weird, we thought it might get a little attention.
Yeah. Well, and even when I tell people that, they're like, wait, you have a Beach Boys podcast? What? And I'm like, well, yeah. And, my buddy, he's a really good fiddle player. And they're like, wait, hold back up, So it's an interesting dynamic for sure. But I like I said, I think it keeps it interesting, it keeps it fun, unique. So.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that.
So then we also, this couple episodes ago, we did start our sponsorship program. The sponsors are our listeners. We don't get sponsors, brands, companies, anything like that. So what we do is you can just go to MatthewHartzMusic.com/sponsor. I throw up a QR code that if you want to just use the QR code here, or go to the link in the description below. But essentially, you can donate or sponsor an episode. And our two sponsors, we got two sponsors for this episode. It's going to be Michael Hoyt and this. Justin, please correct us if we're correct. I
think it's Guadano.
Yes. Justin Guadano and Michael Hoyt. You are the reason why we were able to get this episode out quicker than the other ones. So thank you so much for your sponsorship. You're literally the reason why this episode's coming out. So
yes, and if you haven't donated and you can, we really would appreciate it. It does help us make time to do these things.
Yeah, definitely. When when someone is going to sponsor it, it's like, okay, we can't just push this off. We got to get this done. Not that we don't like to, but we got busy schedules. So, so that's all the housekeeping stuff for today. Let's get into the news, most recent news in the Beach Boys world.
Yes, the Beach Boys world was rocked early last week. Melinda Ledbetter Wilson, Brian's wife, passed away on January 29th at the age of 77. No cause of death given. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. She and Brian had been married for 28 years.
Wow.
That seems like, in my world, it doesn't seem like that long, but wow, that's a long time. And wow, what a huge loss for Brian and their 5 children that they adopted together.
Mm-hmm.
It's, her place in Brian's life was really huge. She helped in getting Brian away from Dr. Landy that last time, a lot along Carl, but she helped and maybe kind of instigated it after she first started dating Brian and saw some of the stuff going on, was able to get. So anyway, that in itself is huge.
Yeah.
But then after that, she ended up managing him basically in every aspect of his life, not just the business. Home and everything. We know the struggles that Brian has, and that could be somewhat of a task.
Yeah.
But she also motivated him, and she inspired him. And I want to say that without Melinda, we wouldn't have so many of the things that we love from Brian in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Just things that come to mind. Obvious ones is Finishing Smile.
Yeah.
And, just all the stuff that went on, and he might have needed that extra push from somebody, a partner who was so supportive. And
right.
I just don't think a lot of that stuff would have happened, if any of it.
Yeah.
And, finally in the post that Brian has put out about this, and he calls her my savior.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. It totally makes sense.
And it's funny because years ago, during the Landy years, I'd often hear little one-offs from him like that were almost like, oh, he saved my life. He did this. And yeah, to a certain extent, that was true also, but I didn't feel it. I didn't feel the sincerity like I do now. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
And so I just want to say to all of Beach Boy Land, my condolences if, for anybody who was close to her and obviously related to her.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry for Brian.
Yeah.
I know this means a big emotional shift in his life that I'd hate to think, what he's going through right now. It's really
like
fresh.
You said, very grateful for her, for...
Yes, and rest in peace, Melinda.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's move on to, and just get into the album.
Well, no, I'm just going to start with some corrections from the last one, because I don't know if how many of the people know this, but I am somewhat on the spectrum, and I deal with ADHD, dyslexia.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but he gets really excited when he's talking about the
dyslexia that shows up when I read things and when I pronounce things, and then when I get excited, it even gets worse, And so having David on the Today Show was just awesome, But I made a few mistakes that I would never make if I was taking the time to really think, and I want to address some of those. I know I made a comment under there on that episode shortly after we released it, saying, "Oh, I just thought of a few things that I got wrong." So I've already covered a little bit of this, but some of the dumb things are I mentioned quarter notes on the organ, and I'm so young when it's eighth notes. Also,
yeah, I knew that.
Forgetting that the oboe sounding instrument in Kiss Me Baby is actually an English horn. I knew that. Thank you, Robbie Long, for getting in touch with me and reminding me of that. I had heard that, and I knew that. It was in that moment, didn't think of it, which brings me to the next thing, the I love you in Please Let Me Wonder, which I adamantly said was Carl in the episode. And once the first comment was made, I remembered I have heard the stories of Annie Wilson, Carl's wife. She had said that it was Brian at the time, and she was at the session. And I've even heard a story where Marilyn was there and talking about Brian having her in a special place so he could see her when he was putting the vocal down, singing to her, and then saying that little I love you at the end. So I had heard that, and I certainly defer to them. And when you listen to it and you think of Brian speaking in a lot softer voice, all of a sudden you get it. But I think that what happened in that moment is I was so excited that I reverted back to, for 40 years, thinking it was Carl.
Uh-huh.
And I hope that makes sense to people, because I think what happens is you revert back to things that are deeply embedded in you as opposed to new knowledge.
Sure.
But man, with that being said, I've always copped to, I'll get things wrong, and I do get things wrong, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want to, I don't want it to look like I'm uneducated on these things, for sure.
Well, and, and the comments that come in that are saying, correcting you, they're always, people are super respectful, and they're just,
no, I appreciate them, and I want people to do that, and I don't take it, it's not I'm not offended by it at all, but it just like makes me go, dang it, you knew that.
Well, and one thing you've always been really good at is that you don't, although I put you up here, in a higher echelon of Beach Boys knowledge, you're real humble about what you know, knowing that there's people out there that know more than you, and you don't think that you're the, so you've always been really, if someone corrects you, you're like, oh my gosh, that's totally what it is. So you don't have an ego tied to it, which is really nice. I don't know if I'd be working with you if you did.
Okay, well, that being said, there's a couple other things. Sandy. I talked about Sandy and Guess I'm Dumb being possibilities instead of the Bull Session with the Big Daddy on the Today album. And I even knew in that moment that what happens is I'll put together things. It's a Russ Titleman wrote both of those tunes with Brian, and they probably wrote them about the same time. And I think Guess I'm Dumb was done sometime in '64. But I was kind of putting those things together when I knew damn good and well that it was more of a summer days and summer nights outtake, at least the last recording they made of it. So anyway, that's, these are all, maybe they're small things, but I want to get the record straight. And the other thing is, when we're doing these breakdowns of the tunes, there's so many things going on in these arrangements that a lot of times I'm not giving exact chord definitions. Sometimes maybe sometimes I'm trying to show movement that's going on, or hey, when you attach this bass line to this thing that the organ's playing in here, then you've got more of this thing going on. So I'd want to just say, I speak of the polytonality of Brian's music all the time anyway, but it's also kind of convoluted and everything in there that sometimes when I'm explaining something, I'm not explaining it from maybe the perspective you think I am.
Right. And so would this be kind of similar to like when we've done covers, like Feel Flows, like when you covered Feel Flows, it was just a guitar and the violin. Mm-hmm. And you told me, this is me trying to encompass all the instruments of that song into.
It's exactly.
Is that
well, that's
same...
what you have to do when you're playing Beach Boy music, whether it, especially the more complicated stuff like this, even from stuff like Love You. He's got so many things going on in there that really what you're trying to do is come up with a chord that represents what the whole arrangement is doing.
Sure.
Like if I sit down with a guitar and do a Beach Boys tune for somebody, I'm going to try to do something that has that bass line they're used to hearing in it, or specific chord voicings and inversions, and just highlighting some of those things that I think are really important. That being said, I don't know if I needed to say that, but that's kind of the end of my little corrections thing here. Yeah, so we've got the album context, and I've got Bruce, exclamation points. He had already done a lot in the industry, like we've talked. He was in surf bands before the Beach Boys released their earliest record, and doing work with different people on that type of music. But Terry Melcher, his really good friend, who he was teaming up with, most specifically in the Ripcords, which pertains to this episode quite a bit. But let's just suffice to say that the Beach Boys already, they knew Bruce.
Right.
They knew him from the industry. They knew him from working with the same people. Because in late '64, Brian officially quit the road after really only being on the road for 7 or 8 months in 1964. Because he really wasn't on the road some before that. But officially he has a breakdown and quits the road. Initially, Glenn Campbell was brought in to sub for him live because he was playing on some of the records, was familiar with the music, but he was already getting going on his own stuff, and kind of a burgeoning solo career. So they knew that time was going to be limited with Glenn out on the road. And so Bruce comes in officially. His first show is April 9th, 65 in New Orleans. And I always had the idea, or the story had been after that first tour that would have ended, sometime in May, I guess is when they came back home the first time, that Bruce came in and started working on Summer Days and Summer Nights with them. However, the hit version of Help Me Rhonda was released, or was recorded in late February, even before Today was released. So before the Today album was released, they were recording a new version of Help Me Rhonda.
Interesting.
For a single release.
Right.
Okay. This is then Terry Melcher, and probably Bruce too, because he worked really closely with him. They came to Brian and said, we want to do Help Me Rhonda. At least Terry did. And that's what spurred Brian to say, hey, I want to record it again and put it out as a single, because he saw the potential in it. And so anyway, that's real close. That's just February that they're probably talking to him. Then I've found in my research that actually there's an outtake, we just talked about it, Sandy, that Bruce is present on and playing, I believe, organ on in late March. So even before this first official tour, I think he was already working on Summer Days sessions with them before he went on the tour. Somehow it possibly was in the works longer than we thought it had been. So let's just put it that way. So he's just so big on this album, both vocally and instrumentally.
Okay.
And on top of that,
have you point those out to me too?
Oh yeah, we're gonna get that as soon as when we get to those tunes.
You'll let me know. Okay.
Do that. But he's another sounding board for Brian, and you can hear it on the session tapes from this album of, Brian respects him. He's been in the industry. He's a schooled musician. Bruce, when we get to his special episode sometime after this one, we'll talk about his education. He's very educated musician.
So we'll do we'll do a Bruce episode like
and
we did
a David Marks and then and others.
Cool. Finding that out now.
So he's this new person that Brian can trust in the studio to say, hey, what's going on, or just a second set of ears along with Carl. And so anyway, get into what it did. It was recorded basically from February to June in 65. It was released on July 5th of 1965. Went to number 2.
Wow.
In the U.S. Shares with Surfin' USA, the highest charting of original Beach Boys studio albums.
Okay.
It also went to number 4 in the U.K. You got to remember now, in late February, they recorded the hit version of Help Me Rhonda that in the interim, I think maybe it got released in May. So before the album's released, Help Me Rhonda goes number 1.
Wow.
Okay, so you've got the momentum of the Today album and then a new hit version of Help Me Rhonda. And supposedly it was Bruce once, either because he was lobbying with Terry to record Help Me Rhonda, then they hear the new version, or maybe it's after the new version goes number 1. Bruce said, you need to put this on the next album, even though you already had it on the Today album. Since this was number 1, you need to put it on the next album. And I don't think Brian wanted to do that.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a little bit of information there. the Today album had not sold as well. I don't know if we need to look up what exactly it did, but it just didn't do as well as Capitol had wanted. So they encouraged Brian for this record to return to maybe some hit formula type stuff and maybe with summer themes, that type of stuff. And Brian obliged, but these so-called simpler tunes, they all had some great little Brian magic in them, some riff or riffs over these very simple chord-wise tunes on some of them. So that's something to keep in mind here. I've got a big star here. As far as the whole Mike Love writing credit thing that happened, is Mike not getting credit on some tunes, and then in the 90s when Brian won his lawsuit, then Mike sued him and finally got credit and money for the stuff he did. This is the album I've decided where it should say Mike got screwed.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'm going to bust out my original copy. I'll talk about this a little bit more. But I'm going to write. You got Brian Wilson, girl from New York City, Brian Wilson, Amusement Parks USA, Brian Wilson. Then I Kissed Her Spectre cover. Salt Lake City, Brian Wilson, Girl Don't Tell Me, Brian Wilson, Help Me Rhonda, Brian Wilson. Mind you, this is what I looked at as a 3-year-old. California Girls, Brian Wilson, Let 'Em Run Wild, Brian Wilson, You're So Good to Me, The Same, Summer Means New Love, obviously. And then the only one that Mike gets credit on is And Your Dream Comes True. The little thing at the acapella thing at the end, which is kind of strange. This literally, and we'll get back into it as we get to the tunes, almost all of those songs were co-written by Mike.
And so he didn't. So he did not get credit even after the lawsuit, or he did.
Oh, he did.
Oh, he did.
He
but
did.
Before.
Now
this is the one that was like blatantly.
Well, but on Today there's some, and on All Summer Long there's some that happen. But this is the album when I looked at it and I'm going, wow.
Yeah.
This was all, and this is why I had also in my mind, that growing up, thinking that Brian wrote all the lyrics on all these things.
Right.
Is a kind of a crazy deal. So there you go. Mike got screwed on this record. It doesn't make it. It's still a fantastic album. And guess what? On a lot of days, Adam, you're not going to believe this. This is my favorite Beach Boy album.
Yeah. Never heard that one.
Yeah. Well, it's,
I get it.
If somebody says what Today or Summer Days or Summer Nights, they're a little bit different, but there's magic in both of them in different ways.
Yeah. This was one of the ones that took me, my first run through, I was like, I don't know about this. But then as I listened to it, it's like it just grew on. The whole album grew on.
Well, you got to, the thing that if you don't know about the simpler themes, and he had been encouraged to do that, you'd think, what the hell are we back to talking about amusement parks and
totally.
That kind of stuff, right?
100%, yeah.
And so he very deftly wove a bunch of intelligence into those things and still made them simple and accessible for the layperson. It's just crazy stuff. So it's a deep primal record for me. One of Mom's first three.
Yeah,
and you guys can see it. This is the original copy, and people say, "My God, what'd you do?" Hey, this is what happens to records when 3-year-olds start listening to them in the early 1970s, and they listen to them all their lives. I'm surprised this record's still intact. I sat down on Uncle Sam's 70 Sony turntable over here and listened to this baby yesterday, and every scratch and pop brought back, vivid childhood memories, took me right back to Twin Falls. I said, wow, at the feelings. It was just insane. And that was after reviewing it for our episode just normally anyway. But once I put on this original thing,
vinyl,
it's like it triggered primal responses in me.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my God, I can visualize that part of our living room.
Totally.
So, and I can close my eyes because this is really the album that I remember listening to, the things like California Girls and Salt Lake City and Let 'Em Run Wild. And I remember hearing all those other instruments. And I remember even at that young age, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 going, you know what, there's a lot more than just guitars on this record.
Yeah.
Guitars, because I see that the Beach, they're playing guitars and bass, but there's organs and pianos and stuff in here. Now, how are they doing that? Not, I wanted to, I'm going to grab this one more time. This is really cool. Al is not on the front cover. We've talked about that before. Now, Bruce was there for the photo shoot. He couldn't be included because of contractual reasons. He was still, was it Columbia that he was still attached to? So for contractual reasons, he couldn't be featured on a Beach Boys cover until after Pet Sounds with Wild Honey. So, but there's pictures of Bruce with them here, but Al was sick, and he says so on the back, but still, it's very odd to me. As popular as they were, why wouldn't you choose to wait and get a photo when you could get Al in there? So anyway, they all have little notes on the back of this, which is cool. I want to read Brian's note to the audience. As I'm writing this, Carl, Ron Swallow, our traveling buddy and wardrobe man, and he plays tambourine on a lot of this album. He's a friend of Carl's. And 3 girls, along with Earl Leaf, the guy from Bull Session with the Big Daddy, are sitting around the coffee table singing Beatles songs. But my mind is somewhere else right now. I'm still working on ideas for this album. We had an unbelievable hassle trying to finish up the songs, especially after a 3-week tour. You should have seen Mike digging his own voice when we played back The Girl from New York City in the studio last week. He was moving and grooving like he used to in the locker room at Dorsey High. I'm glad I finally wrote a song that Carl dug singing. I thought Al pulled off Then I Kissed Her pretty good too. And then there's Dennis, who fell asleep the day he was supposed to sing a lead. Hope you like our efforts this time. Thanks, Brian Wilson. Well, spoiler, that's been pretty much determined, and Brian says the tune that Dennis was supposed to sing was You're So Good to Me. But anyway, Brian also talks about, I finally wrote a song that Carl dug singing. This is where everybody gets the idea that this is Carl's first lead. Because this is one of the only hints that we had towards any of that stuff. And you didn't have vocal credits on the earlier Beach Boys. His first real lead, well, it's Summertime Blues on Surf and Safari album with David. But then on Shutdown Volume 2 is Pom Pom Playgirl. But for years, everybody thought Girl Don't Tell Me was Carl's first lead. And it's because of that liner. But the liner says, I finally wrote a song that Carl dug singing. Remember we talked about Pom Pom Playgirl, like it sounded like something that Carl didn't really want to sing.
He sang it, but he didn't dig singing it. Yeah.
And so there's our kind of little thing on that. I've probably taken too long with some of this stuff, but this album's really important to me. We're almost ready for The Girl from New York City. In late March, like I said, they started on a tune that I just love. It's known as Sandy or Sherry She Needs Me. Brian finally released it on the Imagination album as She Says That She Needs Me. Mike did a version of it in the 70s called Trisha. It's been recycled so many times. It's an absolutely wonderful track that was left over from this period, but Bruce is playing on it, and this is late March, at least if I've got that date right. So that's kind of the beginning of the Summer Days album. And I want to say, I'm not going to say any more about Sandy here, but I do want to do a little mini episode that covers that and Guess I'm Done, the 2 Brian Wilson and Russ Titleman tunes that they didn't use. And also the single, The Little Girl I Once Knew, which was so important. It's one of my favorite records and a big deal, which is not going to be covered. So we're going to do a little tiny episode that's going to be in addition to this. It might not be after this one, but
it's coming.
It will be coming. And so I just wanted to say that. And why don't we get into The Girl from New York City?
Let's get into the real meat and potatoes here, huh? Okay, so The Girl from New York City, love this one. It's a jam. I love this one. I had my head bobbing as soon as I put it on. And there's a guitar in it that I really like. I don't know if it's, I don't know, you call that a little guitar lick or something.
Yeah,
There's
that's Carl.
Yeah, so I really like the guitar in it. But you know, that one I didn't have any like you know, moments that stuck out to me. So I guess I'll let you pick it up and kind of point some stuff out.
Well, it's a Brian and Mike Love tune.
Okay.
Originally
There
just
we
Brian.
go. Yeah.
You know, I said, do you want to dance drives and dance drives in the last episode. This thing has a gutsy drive to it that no other Beach Boy tune has, for sure. I mean, there's just a boom, 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 boom. Just a solid, solid drive to it. And Mike's vocal is tough.
Yeah.
It's got attitude to it. And I love the little sax solo that I think is Steve Douglas from the Wrecking Crew does that little intro thing, which is unique on a Beach Boy record. But then for them just to pound into that thing, then the piano on it is dun, 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 dun. It's a way different rollicking piano style than I've on any Beach Boy record previous, or maybe, you know, not until later, but it's just a very different style. And I knew that as a kid. I go, this is wild. And then I also noticed on the falsetto, who do you think's singing that really high part?
I mean,
You're gonna guess Brian.
I'm going to guess Brian, but
Brian is singing kind of the lead along with Al, I think, as a harmony voice. That's old Bruce. Because Bruce was and so I always knew there was a different timbre to that falsetto growing up. And then when I found out that, not only is Bruce the falsetto voice on here, he's a master pianist, and he's playing piano on this. This is Brian isn't playing. It's Bruce on the piano, Carl on the guitar, Al is on the bass. I want to talk about this a little bit because I mentioned a long time ago in an episode that when I found out Al played a bass on a lot of the early stuff, this was one that really stood out to me. But as I listened to it more, his part is really kind of a simple quarter note part that just stays on the root of the chords. And the part that I was remembering is the Ray Pullman Dan Electro 6-string bass line that's also in the tune. So suffice it, there's Bruce and Carl and Al are playing on it of the Beach Boys, and then Hal Blaine on drums, Ray Pullman on 6-string bass, a couple of sax players, including Steve Douglas, and it's some Beach Boys and some crew guys. Okay, right? I just, if you take away the falsetto, Bruce's falsetto part, and Mike's big boom boom, that stuff, this all of a sudden is one tough R&B number that sounds like it could have been done by, any number of the R&B groups that were really kind of it's got that edge to me for sure. I want to say something about the chords here. It's just got a few chords in it, but so she come out with her best friend for the summer in LA. Just one chord for the whole verse. Dun, 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 a C chord. Dun, 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 dun. And I say, then you go to D, which that sounds like it's a modulation to a whole new key. Stay on it from city, and then finally the G. That could be the 4 of D, but it also can be the 5 of C, which we're going back to. So there's only 3 chords in this thing, and they stay on the chords forever, but it also can be viewed as one long false modulation, because you kind of are thinking that it's in C, then you're thinking it's in D, and then at the very end they come back and do the refrain just over the D and the G chord, so you're going, oh wow, now it really sounds like it's in D. Yeah. But for only a 3-chord tune to have that kind of a feel in the tonal center to it is pretty strange. So, also, I like the bluesy background vocals on this one.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much.
Yeah, you know what's funny is that when the whole Bruce on the falsetto is one thing I just always try to do when I'm listening to these is because I still have a hard time, picking up on whose voice is whose. And so this one, I almost like, I felt like I was getting the hang of it. But then in this one, because I didn't know Bruce was singing on them, there was moments where I was just like, I don't know who is singing here, which that makes me feel a little better knowing that I didn't realize that there was another vocalist in there.
Well, and also Bruce is he's brought into this group. So he's going to try to sing like them.
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe he's using his voice a little bit different on purposely to try to sound like Brian or what the natural falsetto thing would be. And if he's doing that stuff live too, he's going to try to make it more authentic to sound like the records too. So those guys might even be disguising their own voices, and that's why you're having a tough time. I think they all can sound alike at certain times.
Yeah.
It's and we'll talk more about the singing. I've got a note on it down here, but the singing is incredibly good and lush on this whole record.
Yeah.
Bruce is a huge part. Why? But there's some other reasons too. Let's get into Amusement Parks USA.
Yeah. So I mean, we kind of brushed on this earlier. This is definitely another one that's interesting subject matter, like to be singing about. I guess my first thing is who's doing the like circus talk? Who's speaking
in
there?
the middle?
Yeah.
That's Hal Blaine, the drummer.
Okay, so like that was like another moment. I was like, I don't know who that is. So and had Hal done any vocal stuff that I'm not remembering?
Not
before?
on,
like,
not
like
no
in the
speaking.
previous,
I don't think.
No.
I don't think he does some other stuff later on, like in Smile outtakes and stuff. But
and then I guess,
but the laughing in the very beginning, and there's a laugh that's Brian. And then there's a dialogue that's happened while the carnival barker is going on, and that's Brian, and it could be somebody else doing a little kid's voice. I put down the Brian and other, that seems like a fake to me. That's Brian.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Does it kind of fades off, and I tried to turn it up and try to hear. But when it's talking about like the snake dancer, does it say she has the biggest ass in town?
Yes, that's
okay.
Yes, there is, and I didn't know that until I read it in a book.
Okay, because that's why I played it back. I was like, did you just say the biggest ass in town? So that's that's hilarious.
This is for effect. It's an amusement park tune, so it's kind of for the setting of the tune, but they're also doing it tongue in cheek.
Yeah,
obviously.
I mean, it's funny that the ass part. It's when it's fading out. It's like I really had to be like, is that really what they said? That's hilarious.
Well, and I think it's supposed to be a play on she's got the biggest asp in the snake, or something like that. Don't quote me on that.
Got it.
I don't want a correction on that.
That makes more sense because in that context, I just was like, does it even make sense to say biggest ass? Like
no,
I thought it was funny.
Just being funny, and Brian Hal was the funny guy in the crew. He'd always keep them going joke wise when there were slow times. He famously was that guy, and Brian also loved his humor. So Brian and Hal always had kind of a funny thing going on.
Yeah,
and probably dreamed this up.
Yeah,
and it's another simple tune. But it has some of the coolest things in it. It's the crew, wrecking crew mainly, plus Brian on the piano. So just plus Brian. But and then Leon Russell, the famous Leon Russell, is playing the organ part, which I just absolutely love. It really makes this tune because it's what I call the circus or the carnival.
Yeah, it matches the subject matter for sure.
Organ lines. It really puts that all in there.
Definitely.
You got that. That's it. Let's see. That's the movement he's kind of got going on for the whole thing. The tune is F D minor relative, and then the F 5, which is C, back to D minor 6, 4 B flat, G minor, then to C, So it's a simpler tune, but the bass line in it, I want to make it's a strange thing. It's not tough. That's what's kind of going on in that thing. So that's a 1, 2, 1, 5. So just remember that it's an odd little deal. Do we want to bring up that middle part with Hal and Brian just so people can hear that?
All right.
Let's take your car and do Amusement Parks USA.
I think it comes right here.
Let's pick up our friends and do Amusement
Right here.
Parks USA.
Brian. Here's the organ line.
Hurry, hurry, hurry,
Ow.
hurry, folks. Step right up to the Beach Boys Circus, the best little show in town.
You can hear the screaming in the background from the rides. All those sound effects.
Come on in and see Stella the Snake Dancer.
Is it real?
Don't know who that is.
She looks like a fake to me.
Let's go see her.
Cost too much. It was only a dime.
Yeah.
And I love that's another thing I wanted to say. Go ahead and cut it. I love all these little sound effects in here, like the background noise. You can hear the rides and the kids screaming on the rides. And I mean, didn't have to put all that in there. So for a simpler tune, and then their singing is amazing on it. All the harmonies are really, spot on and lush because of the, we'll get into the singing in a little bit. I also want to say about this, I know it was a hit in Japan.
Oh.
They released it in Japan for some reason.
Do you know if this was a song they would do live?
Never heard it live.
You've never heard it live?
No, I never heard it live once. Okay, then
I Kissed Her.
yes, and so this is not an original. It's a Spectre cover,
Oh, okay.
but the gender thing has been I think it's the Crystals that did it. It was the group of Spectres that did it, and then he kissed me.
Oh.
So it was a girl group,
Got
and
it,
so
got it.
then they're just. I
It's
think
just-
the Beach Boys were one of the first group to cover it. Funny thing, Kiss covered it on their Love Gun album in 1977, and also did the same way the Beach Boys did it. Then I Kissed Her. So
Oh, okay. What's the little clicking instrument at the beginning?
I think castanets.
Okay, I don't even know what that.
Their little hand
Oh, okay.
percussion things.
Got it, okay.
This is is the Beach Boys on the tracking, along with Ron Swallow on the tambourine. He's on a few of these. I put a smiley face on
Yeah,
that.
the fact that
'cause
it's a cover, I wonder if that, because one thing I had is like I've been trying to figure out how I know this song because I didn't.
many people have
Okay,
covered it.
okay,
You've
so
heard it.
it's-
So
that
you've
makes-
probably
that
heard
makes
the
more
original version more than anything.
Okay.
The Crystals. It was only like a year or two before this that the original
That makes
came
sense.
out.
That makes sense. And even the fact that you said the Crystals were female singers, I think that makes more sense because whenever I heard it, I was like, I feel like this was done by a female vocalist before. So
I still really like Al's vocal on it, and it's kind of it's a wall of sound. It's Brian paying tribute to Phil Spector, and it kind of sounds like a wall of sound recording, meaning you'd use the Wrecking Crew. Well, guess what? There's no Wrecking Crew on this. This the beat. So what Brian's doing the wall of sound, but actually doing it with the Beach Boys on the tracking too.
Okay.
So that's kind of cool. Then there's the signature riff. And I'm going to play it on this thing. And it kind of carries it. The song is a pretty simple tune, much like everything else we've went over on this side. But that riff carries it, and that was the riff in the Phil thing too, and it is one of the things that Brian really loved about it. That being said, I want to take just a second and talk about this 12-string guitar I've got here. I know that our listeners and watchers have seen it before, but this is a 1964 B2512, Gibson B2512 that my Uncle Sam bought brand new at Holsinger's Music downtown in Boise in 1964. And when I was growing up listening to my dad and Uncle Sam play music, this is the one he was always playing. It got to be in pretty bad disrepair, and actually I got it from him late in his life, and I went and got it worked on, and it is now, it's the best acoustic 12-string I've ever played, and it's certainly better than any of the instruments that Carl and Al got to play on the party. I say, hey, this is a good acoustic 12-string, probably better than anything that was used on the records for the but I just wanted to say something about this guitar and how much it means to me.
Okay.
And, anyway, back to Then I Kissed Her. This was probably, as a child, it was one of the least resonant things on the album for me.
Yeah.
It never got to me.
Okay.
And didn't know it wasn't a Brian Wilson original at the time or anything, just didn't do anything for that little 3, 4, or 5-year-old.
Yeah. So do we want to move on to Salt Lake City?
Yeah, let's go to Salt Lake
Say
City.
that one. So, okay. Are you demoing this one?
Yes, I will be doing
because
some demo and stuff on it.
Because
And
this
we'll be playing a little clip, too.
This might be one that I need to be convinced that to like it. I just don't. It's just not. I even this one I probably listened to more than the other ones because it was the one that it just didn't. I don't know. I couldn't resonate with it. But this is there's been times when I felt this way before. You pick up a guitar, you play it, and then I hear it in a different setting, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, now I get it. So I'm hoping that is the case here. But you said you want me to demo, or do you want me to play something yet? Or
not yet. We'll
Okay.
talk about it a little bit.
Okay, yeah, so
this song was important for me as a little kid because my mom told me real quick how close Salt Lake was to us. We were living in Twin Falls, and then Pocatello after that. So just right down the road.
So it felt okay.
And so then you have that. I do have it. And then I went to Lagoon in Salt Lake very, very, very young, like 5 years old. We went on a family trip to South Dakota to see some relatives. And so I had some context of that. That being said, the Beach Boys at this time were hugely popular, go figure, in Salt Lake. In Utah especially, and it kind of makes sense why the Beach Boys would, with their clean image, it would be a big
that makes sense.
A big group down there. And so this song was actually released as a promo single by the Downtown Salt Lake Merchants Association. I wish I'd like to find one of those.
Yeah.
So it was basically done because that was such a hotbed of Beach Boy fandom in Salt Lake. So it wasn't something that they were just organically inspired to do. Let's just put it that way. It is a simple tune.
Yeah.
But it's got some great lines and bass line things going on in it, and then the sax riff in it is amazing. As far as let's have you first bring up, and we'll just play the beginning of it because I want people to hear this. It's possibly a guitar and a Dano bass playing this intro together, but I just want to let it play through the intro and a little bit into the bridge or verse.
Down in Utah, the guys and I
Notice that riff keeps going. Okay, go ahead and cut it there. I'm going to go ahead and grab this guitar for that. Here's how that line ends up. There was two guitars doing it, but I can... Let me get this thing out of the way here for a second. Do that again. It's just really cool, and I noticed the different aspect of that as a little kid, and I didn't know what it was, but it doesn't have the root in the bottom of it. Andy Paley, a collaborator of Brian's, later on singled this out as saying, yeah, that wild intro on the front of Salt Lake City, it's like it's moving up and forth, or it's just a real, it's the way it's arranged is unique, and it catches your ear in a different way. The tune itself is just a down to down, got this in 9 4 that to 1 in E flat. It's got da 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 back to 4 and then to 1. Then right here we go 5 and then 2 and then 5. I made note of that right there. What's that? That's the little deuce coupe 5 to 2 minor change thing right there that kind of echoes that. And I think I even picked up on that as a little kid. But so you've got that guitar line going, right? That all the way through the verses and stuff, but there's another bass line that's going on, and it's this. It's in E flat instead of F, but this again is 1 2 1 5. Very unique and different. Not difficult, but just odd. And I just made the connection yesterday. Wait a second. That's that same weird bass line from Amusement Parks USA. And wait a second, we're talking about Lagoon and Amusement Parks here. So did Brian decide to use that crazy simple little bass line in here to echo Amusement Parks USA? Because basically he's doing all this material to appease Capitol anyway. These are these simpler tunes with summer themes and everything like that, and so he just kind of weave it in
Creative, yeah.
all so I think I'm not sure if that was done, but I came across that yesterday. Yeah,
Let's move on to Girl Don't Tell Me.
Girl Don't Tell Me.
Okay, so I love this one. I don't know, I just like how it moves, I guess. I don't know the movement of it. I don't know if that makes any sense. Or the flow, it just, I don't know, this one, maybe it's just coming off of Salt Lake City that I didn't like, and then come into this one, I just, I like this one a lot. So
Right. I'm going to go back to Salt Lake City for just a little bit, though. And I wanted the sax solo especially is really, and Brian ended up using that later on because he liked that particular riff so much. These tunes, Salt Lake City, along with Amusement Parks USA, if I didn't say it, those are both Brian and Mike instead of just Brian like it originally said. Yeah. Girl Don't Tell Me is officially a Brian Wilson solo composition.
Got it.
Claims he wrote it on his honeymoon with Marilyn. Without an instrument or anything, just thought it up. We've talked about how everybody thought it was Carl's first lead for years because of that liner that Brian has on the back of this. This is another one. It's all Beach Boys. Brian on the bass, Dennis on the drums, Carl on the guitars, an acoustic guitar and an electric 12-string, and then Bruce on an instrument called a mallet instrument called the Celeste.
Okay,
the little bell-like instrument. It's got an amazing chord progression that I am going to demo, but also this came out. A lot of people have noticed the similarity between this tune and the Beatles song Ticket to Ride.
Oh.
This is kind of a thing that might have been an attempt by Brian to write a Beatles type sounding tune. There's no background vocals on it. It's just Carl's lead on it too, which is kind of strange for this album. Let me go through the changes real quick because it's cool. So A, hi, little girl, and then C, and then the D. That's already
I guess
non-diatonic.
And I guess this is what I can already tell. This is what I mean by like the movement. I just like how this fall flows.
Girl, it's me. Don't you know who I am? And then he goes. And that's on the front too. And then she last summer. And then right here he goes to a 5. I'm the guy who left you with tears in his eye. Can't think of another Beach Boys song that just gets on the 5 heavy and going back from the 5 to the 1 right there. That's pretty muscular. Left you with tears in his eye. F sharp minor, then to C sharp minor, F sharp minor, and then a D with a suspend, and you're back into the verse. So that's neat enough in itself. But when we get to let me play just that through again, or the second half of it. Maybe right here. Now the chorus starts on the 2, B minor, 7, C sharp minor, then we're going to go F sharp minor, then back to C sharp minor, and then we'll go to the 2 again, 3, then to 4, back to the 6, back to 2, then to 3, and then to 6, and finally the 5, and then A on the end. And so I want to do it's basically Brian's rearranging the chord progression just a little bit those 3 times, but it is so effective. And if you don't do this song like that,
So cool.
it is. It's
That's so cool.
an amazing piece of writing, and nobody talks about this tune too much.
Yeah,
you know?
no,
So it's-
that is exactly what I was talking about. But I just like that how that flows, man. That just it just feels good.
it's a nice tune. It's very, very underrated.
Yeah.
Very underrated.
Okay, then help me, Rhonda. The
hit version.
the hit version.
Another one credited to Brian only, originally Brian and Mike.
You know, so we kind of talked about this a little bit. I did what David said he did on where he kind of A-B'd them. He had mentioned that when he listened to the, in the Today album analysis. And so I kind of did that same thing. And, we talk about the audio issue in the one from Today where the in and out, or like the fade in and out.
Uh-huh.
I kind of feel like, and I don't know if it's because I had A-B'd them, but I kind of feel like they subtly did that in this one, but not with like by actually turning it up and turning it down, but like they sing it just a little higher and a little lower.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and that could have been that. A manipulation with the vocals in those.
Yeah,
spots.
where it just felt, because it didn't feel like it was completely like the same level. Like it did feel like there was a little fluctuation. So I just thought that was kind of interesting because I'm definitely much more familiar with the one off the Today album and not this one. So, but I saw you picked up the Rick there. So.
Well, and maybe this is a good. Before I get into the little things about Rhonda, people see this guitar too, and I haven't talked about it much. This is a 19. I think it's a 98 Carl Wilson edition, Rickenbacker 36012. So Rickenbacker 36012 CW is what it is. And when these first came out right after Carl passed away, but he had been consulting with them on doing the signature model. And I think Billy helped finish up after Carl passed. Billy Hinchy helped them. So anyway, they just made a run of 500 of these things. And when I first looked into getting one, I want to say that the list price was way up there, like, up in the fours someplace, 45, somewhere around there. And it was a 2-year waiting list at the time. I even had my music store at the time. And so I was kind of trying to get into it from a
business standpoint.
angle, and there was no getting her done. And so I kind of gave up on it. And then through the years, I'd kind of look and never could find anything. And at the beginning of COVID, I found this gentleman in Maryland had it in mint condition with all of the stuff. And I have had a 36012 before, but not a Carl Wilson signature model.
That's the actual signature right there.
This is a pretty special guitar for me, and
it is such a pretty guitar.
Sanctuary too. So.
Yeah, pretty guitar, and it's light. Like I'd mentioned that when I was helping you, setting up, and I picked it up. I was like, that thing looks like it'd be a lot more heavy than it is, but it's actually seems very light. And
then you pick up the Les Paul.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, back to Rhonda, and it could be that Carl is playing a Rick 36012 on this, and a lot of the electric work that he's doing, like that girl. It
Oh,
could
it
be.
sounds
It
so
could be
good on
on
there.
on that one too. It could be a Fender 12 too. This version of Rhonda, the hit version, is Wrecking Crew plus Brian, piano and organ, Carl on guitars, and Dennis on like tambourine, some sort of. So the Wilson brothers plus the Wrecking Crew on this. The new production is big and tight. The main things for me are the new bass line, even though this isn't the bass. Here's the. So that's the bass line. And then, of course, you've got that. And those are Carl, you know, in there. So those to me are the main signature differences in the production. But overall, it's bigger and tighter than the Today version. These are also, needs to be pointed out, the sessions for the hit version are where Murray pulled his big stunt that's so famous and is all over the internet. So that's kind of funny. This is another one. Hate to say it, guys. Even knowing it was a number one growing up all my life, this has never been a real favorite Beach Boy tune. And this, right along with Then I Kissed Her, was probably one of the least resonant things on the album for me.
Oh, okay.
So anyway.
So then we don't really need to go into much more on that one then?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then we get into...
This is side 2.
Okay, this is where the side 2
This
is.
is side
Okay, and
2.
actually, real quick, any other Bruce vocals that in any of those ones we just...
In a lot of these, maybe not on Rhonda, but I think that he's in the background vocals on
Probably the others.
the other songs. Yeah. I mean, he's that falsetto on The Girl
Yeah.
from New York City, but I definitely can hear him in the stack on Amusement Parks and Salt Lake City. And I don't, there's that. And then, but in California Girls, we got coming up here.
Okay.
This is the first song he says that he sang on.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And this is the one that famously, after he got done with the first tour with them, Brian said, "Hey, why don't you come down to the studio? We're doing a song called California Girls." And Bruce ends up being a signature voice in it. As a matter of fact, we can demo some of that stuff. Let me actually say a little bit more about it before we do that. Because what can I say about the song? I tell the story so much that it's so impactful to me, the music on it, especially the introduction and what it did to my mind as a little kid. Danny Hutton of Three Dog Night, who this is about the time that he started hanging around with Brian, and people ask, what was the moment that you really identified with Brian Wilson's genius, being his friend that early? And he goes, "Oh, that's easy. The introduction to California Girls. That's all." To me, that's where it's just like, oh my God, what's going on here? And for me, so much is going on, and especially as a little kid, it was disorienting in that introduction, but it still all made sense somehow in my mind too. And I would just sit there with my eyes closed, and I talk, it was like a light show going off, that all that stuff in there. And it's basically, we're going to break it down in a second. I'm going to go ahead and just have you play for right now the introduction. And then I'll kind of break that down. Go ahead, cut it. All right. Wow. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. So Carl is playing that on maybe a Rick. It's an electric 12-string, but he plays the same riff 4 times in a row. And what it is, it's a technique called forcing, because the chords change underneath his riff, and at the very last cycle he changes what he's doing. But I also, when I was a little kid, I thought, there's bells going on in this somehow, and there's like little noises that sound like bells and overtones in this introduction. Play just a tiny snippet of it again, and I'll kind of point out it just
That they're starting from the beginning?
Yeah. Just even along with the guitar notes and stuff. Can you hear that texture?
I'm gonna do it one more time. I'm gonna do it one more time though. Oh yeah.
So I've never, I think it's specific to that studio and that guitar and the overtones that room was doing. I've never been able to really recreate that, but what's happening is because of the 12-string guitar and the overtones that it produces. So what Carl's doing there is, then it gets into the tune, right? So he played that same thing 4 or 5 times and then moved it down a whole step right at the end. The chords underneath that are a B, dun, 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 another B, dun, 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 and this echoes something that they do in the verse. This is an A chord with a B in the bass note. Dun, 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 dun. Then we're going to go to an E chord with a B in the bass note. Dun, dun, same thing. Dun, 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 dun. And then we're finally going to go down to an A7 or an A9 here. Hang on here. I want to find a better. It's something like that. And there's a horn. The horn is playing the 9 note in there, and that's just a few things that are going on. I mean, the horns, once we get halfway through, are shading in a certain way. What I'm trying to do as I belabor this, people, is try to give you an idea of why this whole thing hits me like it does. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's going on in the intro. It's a country western shuffle. Brian, decide dun 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 dun. So that's the and then he decided, hey, I'm gonna have a cowboy bass line too, before he even knew it was gonna be called California Girl.
I love the bass line too.
So can you get dun dun dun?
Oh yeah.
Dun, dun. So it's cowboy song, right?
Yeah. Get on your horse.
Then we'll just go through it. So the verses start with the 1 chord B. Well, East Coast girls are hip, I really. And this is where chord books would have told me to go to a B7 or something like that. No, it goes to a full-on A chord, retaining the bass note of the B chord. So it's a polychord. 2 chords at once. And then the E, dun, 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 with the way they talk. F sharp, dun, 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 dun. And then we'll just go right into the chorus. And then here comes our Don't Hurt My Little Sister idea again. Instead of going 1-4, they go 1-2, 1-2 minor. So we've got Wish They Could Be California. Move it back a whole step, do the same thing. Whole step, do the same thing. And this works better than Don't Hurt My Little Sister, because then we've kind of got only a whole step to go back to B. So again, let me play that. Okay, so that kind of goes through. There's some other stuff in the end of it, but that kind of gets through the tune. This is, like I said, the first song that Bruce sang on, and he's a signature part of it. We're going to bring that up in just a second, but I came across the coolest quote yesterday. This writer named Maury Dean talking about California Girls, and it might have been at the time. It says, California Girls is an adventure in chromaticism. And basically, I'm kind of winnowing it down, but he said after that, any garage band trying to follow this will have to get the sheet music because there's just way too much. And that was even somebody at the time going, whoa, what the hell's even going on here?
Right.
These are musical ideas that people hadn't really done before.
Yeah,
you know. So let's bring up, if we can go to the chorus of California Girls, you'll hear Bruce's voice on the second. It's the second, I Wish They All Could Be California. So.
I wish they all could be California. Wish they all could be California.
That's right. And especially that last note, he goes up high. That's one spot where I can hear his voice really well. And then at the very end, go to the tag. Okay, now here's where, after the riff, now Brian will sing the first time, then Bruce answers it. That's Bruce.
Totally can hear that.
So there you go.
Okay, all right. Even you can even hear it in that first. I mean, you can really hear it at the end.
There's so many voices going on. I mean, I'd love to play the whole breakdown of all the harmonies. I don't know why I didn't talk about the singing yet, but the singing is so lush because they got Bruce in there too. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of doubling. They also did on California Girls. They triple tracked some of the stuff. Like Mike's lead, I think for sure is triple tracked, not just double tracked. So it gives it an extra shrillness. And then they might have done that to the background vocals too. Reason they did it, Brian had his first access to an 8-track machine at Columbia. So what they'd go over to Columbia Studios and do the vocals after they'd gotten the track done at Western. And then he'd bounce that down. I think the California Girls, the instruments, all those instruments just on one track. So he had 7 tracks, empty tracks to do a bunch of vocal stacking on. And that was a lot of the tunes on this record too. That's why the vocals sound so lush. It's not just because Bruce is there. That's a big reason, but it's also because this new 8-track machine and they're stacking more vocals in there. So it sounds like a big Beach Boys choir in some of these spots.
Yeah.
So I guess that's basically it.
Yeah. So then we can go to Let Him Run Wild.
Oh,
this is actually my favorite song.
Well, you would not be alone.
Yeah, that's my favorite song on the album. I love the music, but I don't know what is going on in the chorus with the drums. But whatever that is so cool to me. Like every time the chorus came up, I don't know if it's
just a jazz feel.
Is that what's going on?
Yeah,
I just was just like it. Just I guess it has that.
Dun, 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 dun.
Okay.
It's the bass line and the drums are in a laid back syncopated
totally
jazz feel.
Yeah.
The verses, it's just a straight march jazz feel. Then you get back to then.
That's what it is. It's a jazzy. Okay. I couldn't put a name to it, but that makes perfect sense. It's totally jazz style.
Yeah. This is the crew plus Carl. Carl's playing all those cool little 12-string guitar licks that I love so much in this song. Dennis and Carl, historically, especially like when people were first starting to get into Brian's Genius stuff in the 70s, Dennis and Carl would point to the Summer Days and Summer Nights album and this tune in particular as to where they saw the musical direction was really changing and going toward, the stuff towards Pet Sounds. However, looking back, I think they probably just weren't old and mature enough to notice it previous to this, and especially with some of the crazy tunes on the Today album too. But this is where they noticed it. Right. This tune in particular. It's an incredible tune that for once in Beach Boys land is not as hard as it seems.
Oh.
Opposite as it's the opposite from most most Beach Boy tunes. It's got a deceptive use. The tonal centers are deceptive, and there's a really great use of a diminished chord in the chorus. Also, Brian quotes this. I think this tune being inspired by Burt Bacharach.
Oh, okay.
And I can really hear that in there too. But I've got the jazz and swing feel of it is also really unique and makes the song make it feel as good as it does. And the jazzy bass line in it. Brian famously hated his vocal on this years later. Like when Endless Summer came out in 74 and Let 'Em Run Wild was on there, he would cringe when he would hear his vocal. He said, "It sounds like a little girl."
Oh no.
So for years he didn't even want it on compilations and stuff after that because he didn't like it. So on Imagination, he recut it. But I don't, to me, I don't know why he singles this one. I know that it gets really shrill and really high in some spots, but that's just kind of
I wonder if I'm gonna have to go
interesting.
back to when we did the analysis of Imagination, if I felt the same about this song from that album. I'm gonna check that out because this one was a clear favorite for me.
Yeah. So those are both kind of 2/5 movements. In this key, it was 3/6 to begin with, but that's why the tonal center is shifting. It's almost like you're thinking it's a 2/5 to begin with, and then it goes to the true 2/5 after that. And so that's why the melody is always kind of hard to grab a hold of this, and those things that Carl does. Those colors and lines and those things are so cool in that song, and they make it for me. But I do love just the changes in it. And
Will you play? Sorry, I was talking when will you play the beginning again?
watched you walk in, tears filled my eyes. When I heard you talking.
Is this at all?
Dun, 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 dun. So, dun, dun, dun.
Wow.
Let's see. I love that bass line going into that. And then you've got, then the bass line. Let's see.
Love it.
And then we've got that G sharp diminished chord, and then we're going to go right to C sharp 7th, and then C sharp minor 7. Guess you know why. Then back to...
Is there any similarity with that and God Only Knows?
In the feel of it, sure. It bump, bump, bump. It's got quarter note kind of swing feel in it.
I guess it kind of gives me that same sort of vibe.
Yeah, it's a great, great, great tune.
Yeah, that's love. Even when you were just playing right there, I'm like, yeah, this is easily my favorite on here. Okay, so You're So Good to Me. This was on the album that I grew up with, on the compilation album I grew up with. I always liked this one. Yeah, I can't even hear it right now. I'm stuck on the Let 'Em Run Wild stuck in my head.
It's a different tune for them at this time. You're So Good to Me. It's almost like I put down. It's almost like stuff they'd get
You're
to.
my baby. Oh yeah, that's that part right there.
Yeah, and so it's almost it's another kind of R&B number. The guitar. The odd guitar sound is a guitar run through a Leslie organ speaker. Now, I have to say something here because I have always been in love with that sound, and I knew one day, and I did after I got this Jaguar up here, I got not a Hammond B3, but I got a Hammond C3 and had it in my studio for years, which is a bigger church version of the Hammond B3. But anyway, got a Leslie organ speaker with it, and then had a guy build me a little preamp for it. Thank you, Tom Lowe, to where I could plug anything into that Leslie organ speaker. And when I was making my first pop album in 2007, there's a song called I've Tried that I got to use my Jaguar through a Leslie organ speaker, which I think is what's happening here. So play the front end of You're So Good to Me real quick. That's it. Okay, go ahead.
That's it?
Yeah. So that's that guitar going all the way through. Now I asked you before we got started today to find this tune of mine called I've Tried from my Pictures album.
And I gotta scrub to...
Yeah, just where the guitar solo comes in. And
Okay.
I want folks to hear the first time I got to realize my dream.
All right, let me scrub through here.
There it is. The guitar solo was all through the Leslie.
So this is all?
Yeah. Anyway,
Cool. Very
yeah.
cool. No, that's
So,
cool. That's
it
cool
was-
to hear those side by side. That
Well, it
you
was
took
a,
that same approach. That's awesome.
well, it was a dream, kind of that never thought I'd actually realize it, and then I just think everything just kind of happenstance put that organ and that speaker in my life at about the same time, and
yeah,
so I got to do it.
that's awesome.
It's the Beach Boys and along with Bruce on the organ, I think, on this track. So not the Wrecking Crew. The riff obviously is kind of the star of the show. Remember, you identified that being the same thing that they used on the front of their cover on Peggy Sue on the MIU deal. Remember? You made that connection on that. But that's the star of the show. But other than that, this is kind of another basic tune. F is the one chord. You're such a doll. And then to 2. You're so... 5. How come you... And then it just does that again. Well, what other song did we have with a great big long 1, 2, and a 5 in it here? Now, the chorus goes on and has a little bit more dimension, but to me, this echoes what's going on musically in The Girl from New York City with that great big long... Even though it doesn't have the tonal center thing of the false modulations in it, it definitely kind of echoes back to the beginning of the album, let's just say. The simple drums on it. This was supposed to be the Dennis lead, I think. So that's notable. Along with the fact that I really feel like this is shading where they would go with their sound when they got to Wild Honey. This, for some reason, reminds me a lot of Wild Honey.
Oh, interesting.
And so, anyway, we probably better get to another song.
Yeah, Summer Means New Love.
This is
so.
Hey, Brian, California Girls, Let 'Em Run Wild, and You're So Good to Me, all co-written by Mike.
Got it. Okay. Summer Means a New Love. Just a Brian.
Just Brian. Just
Brian.
an instrumental.
So, I love this one. So at first, I was a little disappointed with no lyrics, but then as you continue to listen, you don't need lyrics.
Yeah,
like you don't like the guitar. It tells the story. Like, I mean, I don't know if I've ever felt that strongly about a song as I do this one, where like I could feel like this song genuinely made me like feel what was being like the emotion that was being conveyed through the guitar and the whole arrangement. Like I was like, I kept, when I first listened, I was like, okay, where's the lyrics going to be? And then, a minute in, it's like, at this point, I don't even want lyrics. Like I'm completely engrossed in the music here.
So what's funny is Brian did finally, on his No Peer Pressure album from 2014, they did write lyrics for this, and they did, but I don't like it near as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I'm right with you. This, besides California Girls, is probably the most resonant thing. I would put this on as a little kid and just dream. There was something about the quality of the guitar tone, which I thought was Carl for years, and found out doing my digging it's Tommy Tedesco. Because it's just all the crew. But I loved this as a child. It made me feel so good. I love the chord changes. The chord changes are great, and there's some amazing modulations in the bridge, which kind of go back to some of his earlier stuff, like Your Summer Dream and some other stuff. As a matter of fact, let's bring it up. I think right before I marked a spot before the bridge on this one, if we could bring that, just so they can hear the tone of Tommy's guitar. And it's just a simple melody. It's just what the melody would have been sung. Okay, so here's first modulation. Right there. In an odd spot. One there, too. Kind of, it'll build up to resolving back. And the strings in this.
Oh gosh, love it.
To me, it's I thought that was going to be a weird, or I didn't know it was going to resonate with you, but this is a special song for me. I put in capital letters, really resonant. Takes me right back to Twin Falls.
Yeah, no, yeah. This one, you know, what's funny is that like I can think about where I was with my dog walking when I first heard it, because I was doing, when I do my first listen through of these albums, I just usually do it when I'm walking my dog. I know the exact, that's when you know it hits somewhere, when you hear it again. It's like, and you can hear like those moments, and you can see exactly where you were, like the imagery is just there. So yeah, this one hit for sure. But should we keep going?
Yeah, we got to go.
Okay, so I'm Bugged at My Old Man, which is kind of just a funny song to me.
Brian's humor again.
Yeah,
just
totally. I get it. I actually
like
laughed out loud when I was listening to this one.
And it's just Brian and the piano. Well, there's background vocals too. I'm not sure who that is, but we got to remember this is after the thing happened with Murray on the Rhonda session. And then I talked in one of our seasons about Murray's 1965 letter that just said, I don't know what's happened to you boys, and your mother is bad to you. It was just it's been published before, but Brian was really affected poorly by that. And this is all about Murray.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm bugged at my old man.
Yeah.
And it's a shot at him.
Shot for sure.
And Brian singing a little bit out of tune on the back of the album, because this is one of the first where they have all the lead vocals kind of denoted. I'm bugged at my old man, too embarrassed. Didn't want to, but it was just didn't know it was him. Yeah. So anyway, that's the deal with that. I was always fun. They do it in 1976 on a documentary, on the American Band documentary. I think it was for the Saturday Night Live thing. But anyway, and your dream comes true.
Yeah.
The only one
that
got a mic credit to begin with.
Yeah.
We got a melody that's based on Twinkle Twinkle Little Star.
Oh, okay.
Dun 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 dun. So
interesting.
He freshmanized the heck out of it with all of the harmonies and everything like that. Bruce, on the outtakes from this, they recorded it in snippets. So they would like record a couple of measures at a time, and then record the next, and then edit them all together. Mm-hmm. And so after one of the snippets, Brian says, "Is that any good?" And Bruce goes, "Yeah, it's okay. It wasn't great."
Yeah.
That was the type of feedback that Brian was relying on him for that. So that's.
But I always like these acapellas that they do. I like them.
Oh, they're just... my friend Dominic Leslie, when I gave him all the original Beach Boy albums, he points to this track as one of his favorite things of that first tranche I sent him. But that ends this album, and it's
a good one.
It is. It's an amazing album, and I hope I didn't get too discombobulated.
We got deep into it. Another long one here, but that's okay. We're gonna get into the Beach Boys Party album next episode. Maybe bring in.
Probably Brother John on that one again.
Maybe bring John back. Yeah. So that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, if you want to sponsor an episode, you can just go to MatthewHartzMusic.com/sponsor, or click the link in the description below And that'll kind of determine when we get the next one out. And we appreciate all the support, whether it's just watching, clicking the like and subscribe, or actually becoming a sponsor. We appreciate it all. So thank you so much. We will see you in the next episode when we will do the party album. Cool.